Well, good morning and Easter to everyone. Our co-host Morgan, she's got some audio issues today, which is why we're running just a little bit late.
On stage.
Okay.
Little bit.
It is a, well, let me say, how can you be getting my face?
My face.
Okay, wait, Morgan, are we on? Are we on now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Apologize again. I'm not sure what the difficulty is, but in any event, happy Easter Sunday. We had just started to talk about the two U.S. aircraft that were downed over Iran, and there was an F-15E that was shot down, and the pilot was recovered. But the co-pilot has not been recovered, and there have been attempts to rescue the co-pilot. The two Black Hawk helicopters that went in to try to get him were both shot up, but they managed to return to base. The Iranians have put a bounty on the head of the co-pilot to capture him alive. That's fortunate. but it's not alive or dead. It is live. And in any event, we certainly pray for that co-pilot, that he will be okay. Now, the second aircraft involved an A-10 Warthog plane. Now, they're very effective aircraft, but they were being phased out because they fly low and slow, and now relatively slow and relatively low. But this makes it vulnerable to Iranian shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles. And the Warthog was shot down, and fortunately, the pilot was rescued in that case. So right now, 2 planes went down. 1 pilot, the co-pilot of the F-15, is missing, and so we'll see what happens there. Now, it is clear that at least at this moment, Iran dominates the Strait of Hormuz and controls the global economy. Now, we'll see what happens. The United States and Israel are attempting to bomb the country into submission just by destroying all sorts of infrastructure. There was a very major bridge that was destroyed with the loss of a lot of innocent life. There's also been bombs dropped very close to a nuclear power plant. Now, this is clearly illegal under international law to attack nuclear power plants, and it was on the edge of the power plant, so we don't know. And Israel carried this one out. They have very little regard for the law of war and that type of thing. So typically, when there are really seamy types of things to be done, it's the Israelis who carry it out. Israelis are doing many things. In the war in Lebanon, you know, the Israelis have attacked Lebanon, and they've attacked Lebanon just periodically over and over and over since the creation of Israel in 1948. The reason that Hezbollah exists is they are a defensive force that protects the Lebanese border against Israeli aggressive attacks. And Israel has driven into Lebanon, and in the course of that, there are UN peacekeeping troops that are deployed to hopefully, honestly, to keep the Israelis from attacking into Lebanon. But the Israelis have killed a number of the UN peacekeepers. They really just don't let anything stand in their path. It doesn't matter what is right or wrong. Right is what Netanyahu defines it to be. With the Strait of Hormuz, the Iranian government is in very firm control of the strait, and they are requiring ships that want to pass through the strait to go through Iranian waters, where they are billed a fee of about $1.44 a barrel for oil that passes through. And the oil has to be paid in Chinese yuan or in cryptocurrency. So they're trying to shift the trade in global oil from the US petrodollar, which gives us an enormous geopolitical advantage, and they're trying to shift it to the Chinese yuan. And it's not that they get along well with the Chinese and they don't get along well with us. I guess that's the bottom line. I want to mention something since it is Easter. I'm a little bit concerned. I don't make it a secret that, you know, I'm a Christian and very sincere in my faith. And I am concerned about some of the rhetoric that's being tossed around by what I would call Old Testament evangelicals, who are sort of the Israel first crowd, and they have very close connections with the very wealthy Israel supporters, and they're using such extreme language, and they're in some cases praying to God for things that are very improper, and so I don't intend to criticize anyone by name, but I am concerned when top leaders and certain evangelicals closely aligned with Israel begin to encourage extreme violence and to suggest that Iranians should not be shown mercy. And now, I have no problem whatsoever with Christians praying for our troops, for praying for an end to the war, this type of thing. But I think it's important that that Christians refrain from using language that suggests that God would condone violence against people or become merciless with them. And I just want to point out, I don't want this to become a sermon, but it's important to listen to the Beatitudes that were spoken by Jesus in his Sermon on the Mount. Now, there really are few words spoken by Jesus that are considered to be more profoundly insightful into his teachings. I want you to remember that nowhere in Scripture does Jesus encourage war or suggest that it's a part of his scheme to bring about the spread of Christianity. And where he has one comment that says that he comes to bring the sword, he's talking about and Christians have all agreed on this from the very earliest, that he was talking about the fact that his words and his teaching were going to, in some case, divide families, brother against brother, because they were rather revolutionary at the time. And so I don't think Christians have ever taught that when he said, I come to bring a sword, that he meant anything military. He meant that as a rhetorical way of saying that it's going to be tough. You're going to have to be tough to stand up for your Christian faith. But listen to these Beatitudes and think about them. Now, there are Christian leaders who are saying that there should be no mercy given to the Iranians. And here's what Jesus says about it. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. And here's what he says about peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. So pray for our troops this Easter. From the very beginning, Christians have prayed for those in uniform. Jesus himself praised a Roman centurion for his faith. And there were Christianity was widespread among the Roman soldiers. Now, obviously, a lot of that developed after the crucifixion. It's important to remember also that that Pontius Pilate never wanted to crucify Jesus. He did everything humanly possible to avoid it. But the Sanhedrin, the Jewish leaders and governors of that area, they were the ones who paid the 30 pieces of silver to Judas. They were the ones, their militia were the ones who went out and arrested him in the Garden of Gethsemane. And because they lacked legal authority to crucify him, they took him to Pontius Pilate, who then went in sort of a desperate attempt to avoid being forced to crucify him. And eventually the Sanhedrin paid the mob to cry and to threaten to riot, and they boxed in Pontius Pilate. So in any event, but at that point, then the Christianity just flashed through the Roman armies, and it was very, very widespread. So, but at no time did Jesus Christ ever encourage soldiers to avoid service or to desert their ranks. So it's always proper to pray for our soldiers and to pray for an end to the war. But let's encourage leaders and particularly some of these Israel First evangelical ministers. I love our evangelicals, but there are a small number of them who are so devoted to Israel. They focus on the Old Testament and ignore the New Testament. And we need to get away from this kind of rhetoric. It's a sort of rhetoric that has allowed Benjamin Netanyahu to engage in a genocide in Gaza, to allow the West Bank Jewish settlers to murder and beat and to zip tie men's penises in the West Bank. It's a horrific thing. I do not want us to follow the lead of Netanyahu, whom many of us view as being, one of history's most sinister individuals. So let me just shift over here. I'd like to talk about what Iran has learned from the war so far. Now, I know it's a strange thing to say, but the Iranian old guard was relatively moderate. And I'll just reflect a little bit on this, and you'll understand what I'm saying. During the 12-day war, the Iranian leadership was very quick to seek common ground and to de-escalate the action. If you'll recall, there was an arrangement between Iran and the United States, what a face-saving agreement, that the U.S. would stop the bombing, but we would, that Israel or that Iran would fire a huge volley of missiles, but that they would inform the United States before they did it. They would let us know exactly when and where and on what route they would follow. And that way the United States was able to be prepared and shoot down all of the drones, or almost all. And so that saved face for the Iranians, saved face for the Americans, and everything worked out pretty well. So that's not the kind of thing that some wild-eyed extremist does. The only time that I personally had interaction with the Ayatollah Khamenei was one time. I was very prominent in discussing the war in Syria, and really from the very earliest times until the end. And I was quite surprised. At one point, at the time that Obama had entered into the JCPOA to resolve things and to bring peace, I favored that. I know President Trump, whom I support, I know he does not, and he's very contemptuous of it, but I thought it was good. I thought it was a good agreement. And so there was an incident that occurred where there was a U.S. warship in the Straits of Hormuz, and there was a small boat loaded with sailors that lost engine power, and it drifted into Iranian waters. And this was right at the time that Obama was trying to sort of sell the public on the JCPOA. And unfortunately, what happened in this case is the Iranian Navy, they boarded the U.S. boat, and they were very, very demeaning towards the U.S. sailors. They were humiliating them, and it was just a really nasty show. And so while I was talking about what was going on in Syria and the surrounding areas, I made the point that I thought that Iran had missed a golden opportunity, that regardless of what this boat was doing, whether it was legitimately just floated away without power, or whether it was maybe on some spy mission, really didn't matter. It was not that important. What was important is that if the Iranians had boarded the ship, had, showed sympathy and so forth, had taken pictures gripping and grinning with U.S. sailors, and had thrown them a line and towed them back to the U.S. warship, and then seen them up on board and waved. It would have been an incredible PR opportunity. That's all that I was saying. And I guess it concerned the Ayatollah enough to where his secretary contacted my secretary, and we had a brief exchange of messages. And the message he wanted to convey to me is that it's not as simple as you're saying, that Iran is a very complex society, and there are institutional forces and pressures that affect these decisions, and that obviously there are conflicting viewpoints. And I thought it was a very good reminder, something that everyone should think about from time to time. So that was that's the only time he ever contacted me on anything, just to correct me on that. And I thought it was a point well taken. But this was not some wild, woolly individual. This was, and he was an 86-year-old man. So, and I'm going to tell you, at 86, you start to slow down and you think, okay, I want to leave things in a nice state for everyone. And so this idea that portraying him as some wild-eyed radical, I really don't buy it. And frankly, with the Iranians generally, I'm not too impressed by that type of thing. But in any event, so what has Iran learned? When Israel went in and assassinated, murdered the leaders of Iran, what happened is that you wiped out this old generation of people who had worked accommodations with people throughout the world. They had certain kind of moral, barriers to doing this or doing that. And all of a sudden you had a new guard of very, very embittered people who took power. They had seen us try to trigger a revolution and overthrow the government, which did not make Iranians fond of us. And they had also seen their brothers, their fathers, their uncles, their wives, their children killed by these Israeli airstrikes, because the Israelis do not allow anything to stand in their way. They don't. They're not hung up on the law of warfare and civilized conduct, that type of thing. So they're very bitter. So here's some lessons that they've learned. Number one, Israel and the United States will use peace as a cover for assassinations and surprise attacks. The new guard in Iran will trust no one. They're finished. They've watched and they've seen that when you conduct peace negotiations in good faith with the U.S. and Israel, then you will almost certainly be killed. And that will be your reward. The new guard has learned that the old guard's compromising and their deal making really accomplished nothing for Iran and just got them killed. They discovered that the best defense and the one that is the most morally justified for them is not to go out and to come up with some new strategy to do something more horrific than the other side, but simply to do a tit-for-tat response. So in other words, when Israel launched attacks on the Iranian gas fields, then Iran attacked the Arab gas fields, and Israel doesn't have gas fields, but the Arab gas fields. Now, how is that tit for tat? Well, it's tit for tat because the United States has military bases from which we launch attacks on Iran. And so in Kuwait, in UAE, in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, there are United States military bases that are used to fly and to do the killing in Iran. So it's quite reasonable to say, look, if you're hosting U.S. military forces, then you are part of the problem. And so when they launched attacks against the Arab gas fields, very quickly it got to the White House, and the White House said, okay, let's, Israel, you've got to stop this, no more attacking the gas fields. So that's where we stand right now. So this tit for tat, where they wait, because of course they didn't attack anybody. They were hit with a kind of a Pearl Harbor style attack by the United States and Israel, particularly by Israel, because there seems to be some question whether President Trump was actually trying to discourage Israel from launching this horrible war. And then when they did it anyway, he was kind of in a posture where he was kind of forced into joining in. I wish he had not been. I wish we had just left it to Israel to figure out what they were doing. But in any event, the tit for tat response has been very effective as a strategy, and it protects Iran from any criticism that, hey, look what you're doing. You have no right to attack gas fields that affect the globe. Well, sorry, they attacked ours first. And with the desalinization plants, it's quite clear that there was discussion about Israel attacking the desalinization plant so that they could cause people to die of thirst in Iran. But that seems to have sort of subsided a little bit, because Iran made it very clear that there are all these major desalinization plants. For example, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, is mostly serviced by desalinization plant water. And so the Iranians had just made it clear, okay, you can certainly kill a lot of Iranians by cutting off our water, but just be aware that the capital of Saudi Arabia is probably going to have to evacuate to who knows where, because we're going to punch back. So it's been very effective, tit for tat. Another lesson that has been learned is that Hezbollah is alive and well. They are fighting back against the Israeli forces that are invading Lebanon, and they have been successful at knocking out a considerable number of Israeli tanks. It is quite a change from what it was back 6 months ago. And now the Israelis, while the Israelis are, they're slaughtering people in Iran or in Lebanon, just like they are in Iran. I think a couple of thousand people now. Many of these, by the way, for those who somehow feel more comfortable with the deaths of Muslim Arabs, just understand there are plenty of Christians in Lebanon, and the Israelis, if you ever thought that Israelis somehow had a hands-off with Christians and tried to keep them from dying, I don't think so. The Christians are not their interest. And so there are plenty of Lebanese Christians who are losing their homes to the Israeli invading force, and they're losing their businesses, they're losing their sons, they're losing their daughters, and that type of thing. So, but in any event, Hezbollah is alive and well, and they are knocking out enemy tanks in considerable numbers. The next lesson that they've learned is that Israel and the United States simply have no allies of any consequence. The world is not prepared to join in what they view as a potentially suicidal mission. I know it has frustrated the White House, the idea, well, why don't you just run your tankers through there? Well, there have been a couple that tried to do it, and the crews were killed, and they were burned to death when the Iranians hit the tankers. It's very clear that the Iranians have the power to hit these oil tankers and set them aflame. So we have no allies of consequence. The next thing is that they have discovered that the U.S. public has no stomach for war. We have no interest in the war, obviously. Whether Iran, whether they had a nuclear program, they didn't. Israel has 600 nuclear weapons. There is no way, even if Iran really had wanted to have a nuclear weapon, and let's say that they got one, would they say, well, look at this, we got a nuclear weapon, we're going to fire it at Israel? And what? Have Israel fire 600 nuclear weapons back and kill everybody in Iran? I don't think so. I don't think so. And so this idea that somehow they're an imminent threat, there are countries with nuclear weapons. Pakistan and India have nuclear weapons. North Korea has a nuclear weapon. They haven't just attacked South Korea. There are many things that constrain countries from doing radical things. And honestly, I'm not so sure. Well, I shouldn't say that, I suppose. But anyway, in any event, keep in mind this man who's been demonized, the Ayatollah Khamenei, who was assassinated by Israel, was the man who 4 years after he came to office, following the very bloodthirsty Ayatollah Khomeini, who's the names are easy to confuse. But the first Ayatollah who replaced the Shah was a very brutal fellow, in my opinion. And but when Khomeini took over, he had to consolidate power. But after 4 years, he issued a religious fatwa, which in a way has the same effect as a U.S. Supreme Court edict. He said that it was morally improper for Iran to have a nuclear weapon, and Iran would not seek to have a nuclear weapon. And that remain the law of the land from, I think it was like 2003, but way back then. And so they've had a nuclear program, but they did not seek nuclear weapons. The new regime, I don't know what's going to happen, but certainly we haven't given them reason to think that if only they act reasonably, then we're not going to harm them. So I can't tell you what the new regime will do. All that I can tell you is that if in some way they were to become nuclear armed, it might settle things down in terms of people attacking them recklessly, as has happened this time. But I don't think that it would create a nuclear threat because of the fact that Israel is one of the great nuclear powers of the world. We have discovered, or I won't say we, Iran has discovered, I guess we have too, that Asia, Europe, Latin America, Australia, and Africa have dramatically divergent economic interests from our own. And honestly, the rest of the world is quietly on Iran's side and not on ours. I can't think of a time when this has really been the case. There may have been, but in my lifetime of watching foreign affairs, this is the first time that we've been totally abandoned by the world because they simply view the war as being unjust. But more important, they're not always hung up on justice, but they're most importantly, their economic interests are in accommodating the matters with Iran and not seeing the Straits of Hormuz cut off, because it's incredibly damaging to them. We can handle it domestically, but in terms of global world trade, if it doesn't get resolved at some point here, it's going to cause a global recession. The next thing that has been learned is that U.S. war stocks are badly depleted, and there is some risk that Iran may outlast us in this regard. I don't know, I can't tell you, but there is at least some suggestion that Iran may continue to fire missiles once our missiles are depleted. It is clear that Israel will kill leaders who become prominent, and I think that part of the Israeli strategy is to kill off any leader who emerges in Iran in order to keep the United States from making peace. In the end, the great goal of Netanyahu is to get American troops on the ground, engaged in bloody battle that will go on for generations and shift the focus of violence from Israel over, far distant to Iran. So Israel is out to kill any prominent leaders so that the U.S. has no one to deal with. And we've heard the president expressed that. He said, well, I don't know who's in charge, and we're trying to figure out who to negotiate with. That's not by accident. Israel knows what they're doing, and this is the idea, to decapitate so that there is no one to make peace with. The final thing that I'll mention is that Iran has made it clear that they control the world oil market, and that by doing so, they can impose a global recession. It's not just oil, it is also the products that fertilizer and products with which to make fertilizer. There are a great number of extremely important things that come out of the Straits of Hormuz that flow through there. And really, Iran has a stranglehold on the world economy because of this. Now, who knows? Maybe we will just cause enough murder and mayhem, and maybe we'll be able to get away with it long enough to where the Iranians are forced to accede to our wishes. I really would hope, and on Easter would pray, that the administration comes up with a way to come up with a face-saving solution for ourselves and for Iran. And I would hope that we are not terribly influenced by Israel. Their interests and the United States' interests, the interests of the American people, do not coincide. Not in the slightest do they coincide. The interests of Israel are absolutely in conflict with the interest of the American people, American culture, and I just very much hope that that we draw back from them and from all of the wars that they have caused us to engage in across the Middle East, going back to Herbert Walker Bush. So, in any event, that's where we stand today. Wish you all a very good Easter, and I will be there praying for tomorrow, praying tomorrow for peace and for our troops. And so in any event, have a good Easter tomorrow, and we will see you next Monday.